13th day, Middle-earth month, 1 CE. 2 soul-eaters are in 2 different cities on the same route. The first soul-eater departs at 7 in the morning, traveling at 30 kilometers an hour on average. The second soul-eater is on its return trip. It departs at 8 and is traveling at 20 kilometers an hour due to poor road conditions. A 200-kilometer long road runs between the 2 cities. At what point on the highway do the soul-eaters cross one another? Liam scratched his head as he glowered at the soul-eater problem. A whole season had passed since he returned from his mission in the Holy Kingdom of Roble, or whatever it was now, and he was still trying to catch up with his schoolwork. Director Alpha was merciless. Instead of being nice to him for successfully doing his job for the Sorceress Kingdom, she just found more schoolwork for him to do. When he went to complain to Lady Zaradnik about it, she only smiled and told him that people who did good work got more, not less. "What are you up to, kid?" He looked up to find 2 familiar faces looking in on him from the side of the booth. On the left was Carmen Rizzo, a curly-haired diviner from the Clearwater Scripture. The stern-faced man who spoke was Antonio Picciotto, a member of the Windflower Scripture. Both spies had been in Rantle doing spy things before Liam and his sister came from Facet Town. Homework. Liam looked back down at his problem. Liam could feel them leaning into his booth. They probably thought it was some spy thing. Maybe they could solve the problem for him. He did his best not to look at the generous cleavage dangled enticingly next to his head by Carmen's flimsy garb. Mages and priests had a reputation for dressing lightly, but he felt that they often used that expectation to get away with wearing outrageous outfits. Then again, according to the people at the temple, this was perfectly fine and even encouraged, especially if they were single adult women. Though they were spies for another country, they were also undoubtedly followers of the 6 great gods like he was. This made their interactions weird at times. On one hand, they considered him one of the faithful in a religion that cherished the lives of its members. They'd even act like a big brother or sister at times, displaying pride at his progress and adherence to the teachings of their gods. On the other hand, he was an agent of the country that they were supposed to be spying on. This didn't necessarily mean that their countries were enemies, but it sure was awkward. To Liam's relief, the 2 spies left. To his disappointment, they didn't solve his problem first. He watched as the 2 retreated to their own booth on the tavern floor of the Midnight Mantle to quietly discuss whatever they had seen in his homework. Nearby, spies from the Empire, Riastais, and several city-states in Carnassus cocked an ear to try and catch what they could of it. He wished they would come over and solve the stupid problem instead. After staring at the blank space where the answer was supposed to go for a few more minutes, Liam gave up and put his homework away. He left the tavern and followed the meandering street until it joined with the busy road leading to the city's main plaza. Depending on how one looked at it, very little or quite a lot had changed in Rantle. Everything looked sort of the same, but it was the same in different ways. He was pretty sure it had to do with how much space the city had. Compared to the cities in the Holy Kingdom of Roble, which tended to sprawl along the coast, Rantle was pretty small. To top it off, it was built as a fortress city and the design meant to impede potential invaders also impeded regular traffic. Things went from pretty busy to no one can move in no time at all, so the city's administration was constantly coming up with ways to keep things going. Regular wagons drawn by livestock were prohibited from entering the common areas of the city, and the southern quarters of the military district were being converted into warehouse districts. Cargo deliveries between the warehouses and the city's shops were mostly done during the quiet hours using high-capacity wagons drawn by soul-eaters. Any other time, cargo had to be delivered by foot so the gates and streets didn't get clogged. As a result, the streets of Rantle managed to stay about as full as they always had while becoming 4 or 5 times busier at the same time. The undead could be seen at their usual posts, though they kept adding new ones to the patrols. They put in death assassins just before he went to the Holy Kingdom. Now, there were death wizards, too. Aside from looking different, he wasn't sure how they differed from elder liches. The enticing odor of roasted meat wafted over him as he entered the main plaza with the lunchtime crowd. It was almost overpowering, in fact. That was probably the biggest thing that had changed about the city. With the growing population of demi-humans in the city came a shift in the types of food being sold. For some reason, most of the demi-humans moving into the city were carnivorous, so the food stalls and restaurants were adjusting their offerings to match. There were even a few eateries with demi-human employees now. Not that he minded. The problem was that the growing population of demi-humans kept driving prices up. Demi-humans, with their superior physical attributes, could put in enough work as laborers to afford it, but the average human laborer couldn't. Meat had gone from a luxury that most human families could afford once in a while to something that was entirely out of reach. At least bread and lentils were cheap. He wandered around a bit before deciding to line up at a lizard man's stand. Partially, it was because the line looked the shortest. Mostly, it was because the lizard man was selling grilled fish. Lady Zaradnik had asked him to help in his own little way by purchasing food from demi-human stands, but the demi-humans weren't precisely picky about the food that they served. It wasn't limited to eating brains and eyeballs, either. Once, he had nearly eaten some variety of beastman. Other times, he got responses like "dunno" or "it's meat," and those were the times when he finally thought to ask. On their part, the demi-human vendors were only amused at how picky he was. "What'll it be, kiddo?" Liam looked up to find a brown-scaled lizard man staring across the stall at him. He eyed the fish on the grill. "What kind of fish are these?" Liam asked. "Tasty fish," the lizard man answered. "Right." He pointed to the largest fish on the grill. "I'll take that one," Liam said. "Good choice. 1 silver." Liam fished a silver coin out of his purse. Irantal wasn't known for its supplies of fish, and so it had always been expensive in the past, but a silver coin for one felt outright crazy. In coastal cities like Rimune, the same fish would have probably gone for 2 copper, and that in itself was considered unreasonable compared to prices before the Holy Kingdom was invaded. Fish was still by far the cheapest type of meat in the Sorcerer's Kingdom, however, as not all carnivorous demi-humans had a taste for it. The lizard man wrapped Liam's grilled fish in cheap brown paper and handed it to him. Once considered a commodity for nobles and merchants, paper had become plentiful and cheap as people tried to figure out what to do with the Sorcerer's Kingdom's surplus production. The paper in particular was made from the mountains of straw left over by the absurd grain harvests. As he made his way through the market, Liam unwrapped his lunch and inspected his fish. There wasn't anything weird looking about it, so all he could tell was that it was a fish. A tasty fish. He slipped in behind a group of adventurers discussing some imports from the Empire. All of them sported trainee tags, mostly iron and silver. By the time he made it to the front, they had taken off with anything useful looking. Annoyingly, the Sorcerer's Kingdom's adventurers tended to look for the same magic items that he did and drove prices up for everything. Getting his hands on personal equipment had been much easier back when he was working in the Holy Kingdom. "Hey, Liam!" A familiar voice called out to him from the direction of the cathedral. At the corner leading to the northern cloister, 2 fully armored squires waved at him with their helms tucked under their arms. Liam went over to join them, holding his food protectively. "I'm not giving you any," he said. The 2 boys stared at his fish. Liam stuffed the fish into his mouth. "We barely see you anymore," one of the squires, a rust-haired boy around Liam's age named Roland, said. "You working? Does homework count as work?" While it was true he had been away over spring, most of his summer had been subject to the mercy of the merciless Director Alpha. "I've been busy with school," Liam said. "Why are you guys in your armor?" "We just got back from the Katza Plains," Roland said proudly. "The undead didn't stand a chance against us." "Don't they make it so that the training grounds are always manageable?" "It's not as if they just stand there," Seguin, the younger squire, said. "I destroyed 6 ghouls." Liam wondered if he could destroy a ghoul. The 2 squires felt weaker than he was, but undead opponents were annoying for rogues to fight. Not only were they immune to critical hits, and thus sneak attacks, but most of Liam's combat toolkit was useless against them. "How long were you out there for?" Liam asked. We went with a ministry team following the north bank of the river, then we stayed overnight at the village near the border on the third day. Then we spent 1 day in the Katsa Plains before escorting the ministry team down the border for another 2 days. After that, we trained in the Katsa Plains again for a day before escorting the ministry team west and back up the highway to Rantel. "Are they preparing you for missionary work?" Sister Alessia said that it's how patrols work in Altamora, Roland replied. "The paladins based in Corlin County do the same thing. I guess it could count as missionary work if we were in Wagner County. Not that the priests there would let us." "Do you guys even see each other?" Liam asked. "Not really. Bishop Osteen doesn't want us stirring up any trouble, so we don't ever get close to their turf." "Oi, what are you lazy louts standing around for? Your reports are due by dinner." The 2 squires cringed in unison as Sister Alessia appeared from the cathedral stables with Vicar Aspasia. The paladin's olive gaze went between the 2 boys before landing squarely on Liam. "Oh? If it is not our apprentice assassin." "I'm an assassin now," Liam said. "Congratulations," Vicar Aspasia smiled. "Let us all pray that you are not an early bloomer," Sister Alessia said. "You could very well become an inquisitor one day." "How many people did you have to kill to graduate?" Seguin asked with sparkly eyes. Seguin's question gave Liam pause. Did he kill someone to graduate? "I'm not sure," Liam said. "I've lost track of how many people I've killed." "Oh." Sounds of admiration rose from the acolytes and squires nearby. Liam glanced at his surroundings, a sense of unease filling him over how much attention he had attracted. His instincts as a rogue screamed at him to relocate before something happened. "Liam." A girl's voice drifted over the din of the plaza. The soles of Liam's boots scraped over the pavement as he turned to make himself scarce. "Liam, take responsibility." "Oh, sh." He turned to flee, but his legs swung out from under him as something snatched him by the skull and lifted him clean into the air. "Confess." Sister Alessia's cold voice brushed up against the back of his neck. "Who's the Inquisitor now?" Liam kicked his feet ineffectually as he dangled in place. Sister Alessia served as one of the cathedral's poster girls, but she was undeniably a brute. The squires and acolytes that had just gathered to admire him backed away 5 steps to avoid becoming collateral damage. Someone pushed their way past the ring of temple staff. A distressed gasp cut through the air. "Liam. What are you doing, you crazy woman?" Didn't you just say I?" Liam's body swung wide. He was jerked around several times as a scuffle broke out behind him. "What are you doing, you crazy girl?" Sister Alessia said as Liam's legs continued to swing around. "Let go of my husband, you evil paladin." "Huh?" His body stopped swinging around. It was an understandably confusing demand. Fallen paladins became dark knights, but no one called an active paladin evil. "What do you mean by husband?" Sister Alessia asked. "Liam is only 13. "He's 14, Nat corrected the paladin. "Don't talk as if you know him." "Either way," Vicar Aspasia said, "it's far too early for Liam to be married." "What are you talking about?" Nat's voice grew increasingly heated. "Liam's married to me." Liam tested Sister Alessia's grip on his head, but it remained as unyielding as an adamantite vice. He should have stayed in the tavern to do his homework. With Nat facing her imminent demise at the jaws of Calasiel, Liam decided to bring her back to the Sorcerer's Kingdom with him. The stereotypically simple-minded Frost Dragon offered no argument as her orders were to leave no witnesses behind, and Liam offered to buy her a whole deer from Warden's Vale if she gave Nat a ride. The strange part was that Lady Shiltir, who had given Carly her orders in the first place, seemed perfectly fine with it because Nat was cute. Lord Demiurge was intrigued by Liam's account of Nat's talent as a leatherworker, so Liam was tasked with securing accommodations for her. At first, Nat was too scared to leave her lodgings in Rantle's common district. Undead and demi-humans frequently strode the streets, and she couldn't even muster the courage to draw water at the local well. 3 months later, that was evidently no longer the case. "The issue of your hidden wife must be brought up with your guardian," Sister Alessia said. My guardian?" Liam froze. "You mean Lady Zaradnik?" Why you can't do that," Liam said. "If she finds out, all that'll be left of me is a crater." "Justice comes to all eventually," the paladin intoned. "I didn't do anything wrong." "Then what do you have to fear?" Sister Alessia smiled. For some reason, Nat took exception to the paladin's smile and grabbed Liam around the waist. "Let Liam go. I bet you're just jealous because he didn't marry you. Does this girl ever listen?" He couldn't recall them having done anything to make her think that they were married. They didn't have a wedding or even a ceremony with a priest. All he did was pick her off of a platform and have her do stuff for him. He had even set her up to be successful once he left, though that part hadn't gone according to plan due to the insane insurrection that set Hobans aflame. "Enough," Sister Alessia said. "We are taking this to court." "I'm innocent," Liam protested. The paladin set him back down and gave him a poke in the back. "Walk," she said. There was little he could do against an orichalcum rank paladin. She marched him back out of the market and up the streets of the common district. They eventually crossed through the inner wall's southern gate, entering the administrative center of the city. Nat clung to his arm as they passed by the powerful undead stationed at every office entrance and street corner. She froze entirely when they arrived at a manor with the number 4 on the gate, refusing to get too close to the Death Knight standing on the left side. The footman on the right gave each one of them a glance before nodding at the vicar respectfully. "Vicar Aspasia," he said. "I hope the day finds you well." "Blessings of the Six be upon you, Terence," the cleric replied. "We've come to speak with Baroness Zaradnik about a personal matter." "Unfortunately," Terence replied, "my lady is not in the city at the moment." Liam breathed a sigh of relief. It appeared that he had been granted a stay of execution. "Is that so?" Vicar Aspasia said. "Does that mean she's back in Warden's Vale? Or perhaps the trade exposition in Corlin Harbour?" "Lady Zaradnik has gone to visit her liege's territory," the footman replied. "She's been away for a while now and we haven't received word on when she will return." The cleric thanked the footman before they went back the way that they came. Unfortunately, the way Sister Alessia hovered behind him suggested that they weren't done with him yet. "Can I go now?" Liam asked. "Of course not," the paladin answered. "The Dominia may not be around, but you have another guardian with whom we can discuss your indiscretions." "What indiscretions?" "That's right," Nat said. "We are a married couple. Nothing we do together is an indiscretion." Liam sighed as he was escorted to a wagon. Hopefully, he would be assigned on a mission soon that would send him far away from homework and girls. "Liam," Nat whispered, "where are these horrible death worshippers taking us?" "To Corlin Harbour," Liam replied. "You need to be on your best behavior. The person we're being taken to is a high noble." Nat turned pale and swallowed. "Your guardian is a high noble? I didn't know you were such an important person." Liam stared out the window as their wagon rolled through the vineyards south of the city. Liam's sickness only ever seemed to get worse. He could probably butcher an entire city at this point as she would only consider it an achievement by her husband. "Somebody's in trouble." A light, mocking voice greeted him as he disembarked at the gardens of Castle Corlin. He turned his voice to catch an Ijania agent working undercover as a maid giving him a mischievous look. "Vicar Aspasia, a footman in the livery of House Corlin bowed, I hope the day finds you well." "Blessings of the Six be upon you," the cleric replied. "We are here to discuss a private matter with Countess Corlin." "Your timing is fortunate," the footman said. "My lady is between tours for lunch at the moment. This way, please." Rather than guide them into the massive palace at the end of the garden, they walked around it to the garden on the other side. There, They found Countess Corlin standing in a gazebo that had been repurposed into an office. To Liam's surprise, the figure standing across from her wasn't one of the many imperial aristocrats that had visited over the summer, but a hulking Overlord. Nat let out an utterly terrified noise and hid behind him, but the Overlord seemed entirely preoccupied with staring at the documents spread out over the table. Countess Corlin looked up from her work, her golden hair glittering in the sunlight as she emerged to greet the vicar with a graceful curtsy. "Vicar Aspasia. I hope the day finds you well. Blessings of the Sixth be upon you, Countess Corlin," the cleric replied with a ritual gesture. "Our apologies for interrupting your busy schedule, but a matter of grave concern has been brought to our awareness." "What might that be?" the Countess asked. "This girl here claims that Liam is her husband," Sister Alessia said. "Don't just throw it out there all of the sudden." "It's not a claim," Nat countered. "Liam is my husband. We've been married since spring." Liam silently wondered whether any protests on his part would make things worse or not. Lady Corlin's amethyst gaze seemed to harden as it fell upon him. "Would you care to explain, Liam?" He didn't want to hurt Nat's feelings, but he couldn't figure out a way to explain what was going on without doing so. Making things clear from the start might have helped, but he couldn't do so without putting his mission at risk. It was embarrassing to think that he thought himself clever for finding such an elegant solution at the time. "It was, I did meet her in the spring," Liam said. "But it's not as simple as it sounds." "Go on." "I was working in Hobans and the people I got in with expected me to have a girl after I distinguished myself. Not having one would have probably affected my standing with everyone, so I sorta went along with it." "Getting married does not sound like sorta," Sister Alessia growled. "And how did you end up with Nat, my lady?" Liam said. "You see, the way the camp worked, there were a lot of men from the south. Spares and such that the nobles could afford to bring along with them to help maintain order in the north. Most weren't married when they came in, so they set up a program where women would be brought in and offered to the men. They even spent a few weeks educating them to be proper wives for members of a noble's retinue." "I've read the reports," Lady Corlin said. "How did you end up with Nat in particular?" The official reports probably didn't render Liam's girl problems in any degree of detail. As he mentally summarized the event in question and the rationale behind his actions, Nat spoke up. "He picked me," she said proudly. "When it was my turn on the platform, he took my hand and he started making a home for our family right away." "Is that so?" Lady Corlin raised an eyebrow. "What were the circumstances that led to you entering the camp?" "Living in the city became super expensive," Nat replied. "My family built up a big debt, so they had to sell me." The slightest of frowns turned the corner of the Countess' lip. "Liam, doesn't that mean she's a slave?" Technically. I didn't buy her or anything though. She was working the entire time we were together, so she's probably done enough to pay off her family's debt a few times over." "How much did your family owe, Nat?" Countess Corlin asked. "I don't know," Nat answered. "Then do you have any record of the transaction between your family and the camp?" "No. The reports mentioned that these camps utilized their own scrip rather than any internationally recognized currency," Lady Corlin said. "I take it that you weren't able to exchange any of it for something of value before coming here?" Nat shook her head. The Countess turned her attention back to Liam. "Summarize her circumstances since arriving in the Sorcerer's Kingdom." "I found her a job in the city after registering her with the guilds," Liam said. "It was pretty easy with the demand for skilled labor. She's working as a journeyman at a cobbler's shop and staying upstairs. I haven't seen her much since then." He could almost feel Nat's dissatisfaction as he related her situation in the city. Lady Corlin crossed her arms as she scrutinized the brown-haired girl. "So she's a leatherworker?" "Yes, my lady," Liam said. "That's why I chose her in the first place. Well, sort of. First, I asked the girls on the platform who could read and she was the only one who could. After that, I found out she was from a family of leatherworkers, so I set up a workshop for her in the camp. She's really talented, her stuff is consistently good enough to serve as a base for enchantment. So you encouraged and supported her growth while having her act as a component of your profile in the Holy Kingdom. I wasn't acting. Nat protested, I'm Liam's wife and I love him more than anything else in the world. To his side, Vicar Aspasia shook her head. I'm happy to hear that you followed the scriptures and acted to help Nat realize her potential, she said, but, at the same time. A sinner, Sister Alessia said. This boy is dangerous. I fear for young Liam's future, Lady Corlin, the cleric nodded in agreement. As well as for the future of Nat. The Countess uncrossed her arms, tapping her finger lightly against her hip. Perhaps some time apart will help, she said. Liam can't afford any interruptions to his studies or his work, and it sounds like Nat still has plenty of room for professional development. Warden's Vale would welcome someone with her capabilities. Warden? Nat clutched at Liam's sleeve, I don't want to go to prison. Loving Liam isn't a crime. Warden's Vale isn't a prison, Countess Corlin told her with an amused smile. It's actually a very nice place. Liam's house is there, I'll go, Nat said. Are you certain? Warden's Vale isn't a place where just anyone can live. If Liam lives there, then I'm living there. I see. Women were incomprehensible creatures. At least he would be dealing with one less in the city. As Countess Corlin made arrangements for Nat's move, Liam spotted Countess Wagner walking into the garden out of the corner of his eye. Not walking, slinking. He furrowed her brow as he followed her strange entrance, watching as the noblewoman silently made her way to the gazebo. Then, for some strange reason, she pulled a big cucumber out of her dress and put it on the floor behind the beastman before backing away. The Overlord's ears swiveled at the sound of swishing skirts. She twisted her body partway before leaping into the air. Yeah? The Overlord's head struck the ceiling of the gazebo and she hit the ground at a run, sprinting on all fours to disappear into a nearby clump of bushes. Lady Wagner burst out into laughter, as did Sister Alessia. Countess Corlin, however, turned on the younger noblewoman with a cross look. Leanne. Lady Shawk is already on edge being in a strange place. How could you treat her like some sort of cat? I was curious, Lady Wagner shrugged. Anyway, I just got back from speaking with Her Excellency. Things are about to get hella busy. What did she say? A bunch of things, Lady Wagner said as she scanned through the people present. Oh, Liam, great timing. You've got a new mission, Elias, it's time. At the sound of his wife's voice, Elias glanced at the timepiece on the desk of his private study before rubbing his tired eyes. He shouldn't have spent the night awake, but the thought of the coming meeting left him sleepless and paranoid. Everything had to be perfect, nothing could go wrong or he would incur the wrath of the very personification of evil. Burdened by worries he couldn't shake off, he dragged himself out of his study and into the main bedroom of his solar. His wife fussed over his appearance, and he sighed as he brought himself before their bedroom's body-length mirror. I look terrible, Elias said. I'll be back with the makeup kit, his wife, Valkyrie, said. Speaking of which, have you been able to secure any new products from the Holy Kingdom? Nothing's come out of that place since it was invaded by the Demon Emperor, Elias replied. The merchants haven't been able to secure any alternatives, either. A shame, Valkyrie said as she returned with a lacquered ebony chest decorated with gold leaf. You could use the salve we had last year. We'll just have to make do with this. Elias closed his eyes as his wife went to work on his face. His naturally pallid appearance usually gave the impression that he was decades older than he was, but what he saw in the mirror was positively ghastly. It's all that damned sorcerer king's fault. He had little choice but to accept that devil's bargain, and now he was paying for it in both mind and soul. Sleepless nights followed restless days as he was forced to help engineer the downfall of the kingdom that he had worked for nearly 2 decades to keep from falling apart. Guilt was barely an issue, It was the threat that hung over his family that caused him to constantly second-guess himself and the intentions of his new master. All too often, he found himself yearning for the days when he had nothing to worry about aside from his personal ambitions. "Have you learned anything about this compliance officer?" his wife asked. "Nothing," Elias answered. "The Sorcerer's Kingdom's agents appear and disappear as they please, and there's no way to keep track of them." To underscore that point, he was instructed to receive the Sorcerer's Kingdom's agent in the drawing room of his solar. All they could do was make fearful preparations for its arrival. "Are the carriages to the summer villa ready to depart?" Elias asked. "Yes, dear." "Good. I don't want you and Henri here any longer than you need to be. They can't be allowed to threaten us any further." His wife and son would make their introductions and leave with the excuse that they were going to the summer villa for the health of his expecting wife. In all honesty, he didn't want them present for even that much. There was no telling what sort of diabolical scheme the Sorcerer King would hatch to further entrap him and his family, but he couldn't afford to give him excuses for punishment by showing any discourtesy. At the appointed time of the agent's arrival, Elias ordered the household staff out of the solar and gathered with his family in the drawing room. He placed his hands on Henri's shoulders, trying to muster his confidence even as he wondered what sort of monster would appear before them. Mere seconds passed before a circular void grew over the carpet. The tension building up with him swiftly transformed into confusion as a boy bearing a box came out and the hole closed behind him. "That's all they're sending?" He scrutinized his newly arrived guest. By all appearances, he was a plainly dressed youth with flaxen hair that one might find anywhere in Riastai's. What was going on? There was surely some scheme afoot. Elias came to his senses once he realized the boy was looking up at him expectantly. He offered a belated bow. "Elias Brant Dale Reven, Lord of Ravel and the Southeastern Marches. This is my wife, Valkyrie, and my son, Henri." The newcomer lowered his head, presenting the strange box to them with both hands. "Thank you for your welcome, Lord Reven. My name is Liam. Lord Demiurge wishes to express his congratulations on your coming child." Alarms went off in his head at the mention of the devil's name and his wife's face went deathly pale. Everything about the strange encounter finally clicked. The arrival of this boy was nothing less than a blatant threat from the Sorcerer's Kingdom. They knew. They knew that his wife was expecting and wasted no time insinuating their intentions. At any point, anywhere, a hole could open in the air and his family would be gone. The next time he saw Henri, he might end up like the boy before him, a slave to the Sorcerer King and his monstrous minions. "If I may ask, Liam," Valkyrie said as she gave the box a wary look, "what is it?" It's a collection of goods popular with pregnant women in the Sorcerer's Kingdom," Liam replied. "Like hell it is." There was absolutely no way the undead Sorcerer King would care about the needs and desires of the living. In all likelihood, it was simply another piece of his unfathomable ploys. Knowing the nature of his devilish minion, he wouldn't be at all surprised that the gifts transformed his unborn child into a grotesque monstrosity that would tear its way out of his wife's womb to attack Henri. Elias gingerly accepted the box with a polite smile. "We'll be sure to make good use of them," he said. "Please convey our appreciation to your master. I must have a footman burn this at the nearest opportunity." "It's about time we departed, my lord," his wife said. "Yes, that's right," Elias clasped his hands and turned to his wife. "I nearly forgot amidst the excitement over our new guest. Please take good care of your health, my lady." "Where is she going?" Liam asked. "To a villa in the countryside," Elias replied. "It's for the baby's health. The city is quite filthy, after all." "What about the gift?" Partway out the door, his wife froze. Did the boy know? There was a high chance he did. There was also a high chance he wasn't a boy at all. His nonchalant attitude around nobles proved that his appearance as a human commoner was nothing more than an insidious guise. Elias breathed a silent sigh of relief as a footman appeared to remove the box from the room. He put on a pleasant face as he gestured for Liam to take a seat. "I believe we have much to discuss," Elias said. "I'll have the staff bring in some refreshments." "If it's all the same to you," Liam replied, "I'd like to get to work right away. I'm not very good at explaining things, so your questions will probably best be answered by observing my work." Definitely not a commoner, but he also lacks the etiquette of any well-bred scion. A commoner wouldn't dare dream of declining an invitation from a member of the gentry, never mind one of the great nobles of Riastais. Elias gestured towards the solo entrance, his mask unchanged. "Your dedication to your duties is admirable," Elias said. "Let us be on our way, then." They made their way out of his manor in the nobles' quarter of Ravel. To Elias' dismay, his wife's carriages were still making last-minute preparations to depart. He silently urged the staff to be on their way while his son stared at Liam through the glass of his cabin. "Is something wrong?" Liam asked. Nothing at all," Elias answered. "I suppose we'll have to walk over to our carriage." "Actually," Liam said, "it would be better for my work if we didn't take a carriage." "I beg your pardon?" "I'm a compliance officer for the Ministry of Transportation," Liam told him. "I'm here to inspect your logistical infrastructure. Doing that from inside a carriage would be pretty hard." "I see. Then allow me to arrange for an escort." "Is it that dangerous in your city?" Elias blinked at the boy's question. Was this part of his inspection? "I'll be accompanying you. Are nobles not accompanied by an armed escort where you come from?" "Not usually," Liam replied. "There are a lot of noblewomen, so you see them with their maids, I guess." He mentally reviewed the intelligence he had received over the months from his agents in Rantel. The streets were reported to be safe, but the streets of Ravel were also considered the safest in all of Riastais. Still, it was an utterly ludicrous notion for any noble to appear in public without an escort. No matter how secure one felt the streets were, it was impossible to be completely safe against assassins sent by one's rivals. "Is he trying to get me killed? Or is this the naivete of youth? Or perhaps he's a monster with none of the common sense of civilized beings." "Liam," he said, "have you been working as a compliance officer for long?" "This is my first job as one," Liam replied. "What were you before that?" "An assassin. Well, I still am one." They walked out of the manor's main gate with triple the standard escort. Liam paid the knights and their squads of men at arms no mind as he scrutinized the road leading down from the manor, clipboard in hand. "When was this road paved?" the assassin asked. 5 summers ago, Elias replied. "Are the roads all over the city like this?" "No, only this part of the city has roads of this quality. Maintenance would be crippling if they were constructed everywhere." Elias looked over the assassin's shoulder to catch a glimpse of what he was writing down. To his surprise, it appeared that he was simply filling out fields on a pre-made form. His cheek twitched as the boy checked off the passable for low-volume traffic box on his assessment. "What do you mean by passable? These are the finest roads in Riastais, boy. What criteria are you using for this scoring?" Elias asked. These roads are about the same quality as the ones in Rantel's central district before it was annexed. A grade above that is the Imperial Road Network." He supposed that much made sense. Anyone who had seen the Empire's road network would admit to its superiority relative to infrastructure in Riastais. Imperial infrastructure was the product of generations of development, while paved roads in the kingdom were a relatively recent addition. The problem was that the grade the Imperial Road Network received had the slightly less dubious descriptor of inadequate for high-volume traffic. Additionally, his roads were marked as high cost and high maintenance, though he was well aware of the cost of maintaining good roads since he was the one paying for the damned things. The assassin wandered off, silently mouthing the lines on his clipboard as he inspected the closest intersection. Their slow progress combined with the overly large retinue following a marquis that was walking around in public quickly attracted the attention of the surrounding manors. "My lord," one of the knights in his escort leaned in close, We are being bombarded by queries from the residents. How shall we respond? How indeed? Never in all of his life did he hear of a marquis casually strolling around in a city with the equivalent of a count's entire armed retinue in tow. A quick scan of the various retainers whispering among themselves told him all he needed to know about what they were thinking. Inform them that there's nothing to be wary of, Elias replied. We are simply conducting a survey. Organize the men in a way that suggests this. Yes, my lord. The knights and their men quickly spread out to form a cordon isolating their section of the road. This, however, only seemed to lead to questions about how new roadwork would affect the budget. Lord Revan, the stout Count of Lars, called out to him, wasn't a large portion of this year's budget supposed to supplement the replacement of men-at-arms lost last winter? How can we afford to pay for new infrastructure at the same time? It's a preliminary survey, Lord Lars, Elias replied. This year's budget still stands. My lord, another of his vassals asked, when should we expect the roadwork related to this survey to be brought up in court? Elias sent a look to the assassin, who was returning from his inspection of the intersection. The boy, or whatever he was, looked back and forth between the growing number of curious residents assembled along the cordon. The timing's bad, honestly, Liam said. The Empire's expanded its holdings by about 15% in the last year, and the Imperial Army's engineering corps can't hope to keep up with development. Every dwarf company establishing itself these days is getting sucked eastward to work in the Empire. The dwarves? Do you mean to say that you're performing these surveys for a dwarf company? I assume that this district of Ravel will only accept the best. The assembled nobles were quick to agree with the boy's assertion. Though Re-Estais had no dealings with the dwarves for several generations, no thanks to House Bloomrush's desire to corner the market for metals, the reputation of their stonework was legendary. He couldn't imagine what his vassals were imagining, however, as no examples of that stonework remained in the vicinity. But don't the dwarves currently have an affiliation with the Sorcerer's Kingdom? One of the less excitable nobles noted. The Dwarven Kingdom in the Azalisia Mountains is a sovereign state, Liam replied. They trade with and work for whoever can pay. It was an answer that the nobles could easily accept. By painting the dwarves as something similar to merchants, he conjured the impression that they held no loyalties to any particular country. That might end up causing problems in the long run, but only when the skills of the dwarves weren't in demand. Elias wondered if the assassin's answers were rehearsed. Assassins also had a reputation for deception and subterfuge, so the notion that he was trained to lie as easily as one breathed wasn't out of the question. If only Lockmayer hadn't perished. The veteran rogue would have been able to provide a much better read on the Sorcerer's Kingdom's agent. Unfortunately, retainers of that caliber were nearly impossible to replace. An hour passed before Liam was satisfied with the information he had collected. He left the quarter through the market gate, at which point the curious nobles and their retainers made themselves scarce. The sentries at the gate sent Elias tentative looks, their confusion apparent over the fact that he had made his way over on foot with a small army of armsmen. Not coming? The assassin asked. This is highly irregular. The nobles that I know go wherever they want. It's not the same here. What sort of noble could be so heedless? Was life in the Sorcerer's Kingdom so dismal that Rantle's surviving aristocrats listlessly wandered the streets, waiting to be killed off by one of the countless undead horrors infesting the city? Bring up a carriage, Elias ordered one of his retainers, then turned to address the assassin. I'd rather not cause a scene. The assassin merely shrugged and continued on his way. Elias looked on from the gate as he waited for his transportation. The main roads of the common districts were paved, but the construction was of much poorer quality. He could only imagine how they would be rated relative to dwarven work. By the time his carriage arrived, the assassin had advanced several blocks. Elias sent one group of armsmen to shadow him and instructed the carriage's driver to follow. Every time the vehicle stopped, the staff of the shop they lingered in front of became a mess of confusion and nervousness as they waited upon his patronage. Sir Dennis, the tall knight riding in the cabin with him, seemed all too aware of the disruptions that they were causing. "My lord, if I may ask, who is that boy?" "It's better that you don't know," Elias replied. "Just make sure that no harm comes to him and that he suffers no offense." "Yes, my lord." The knight's stony expression made it clear that he had already figured out where Liam was from. It couldn't be helped. House Revan was already taking measures to distance itself from the rest of Re-Estize, and those who were aware of it required little thought to plot its political trajectory. The insular nature of Re-Estize society made it an almost effortless matter to keep the rest of the kingdom ignorant of what was going on in his territory. Within the borders of his march, however, it was nearly impossible to hide. By his reckoning, almost every count and viscount under him, 23 major houses, already had a solid sense of what was going on. Those who weren't aware were the minor nobles who didn't have the time, resources, or inclination to dabble in politics beyond their respective fiefs. Either way, he was confident that none of his vassals would betray him. Nobles only suffered the rule of a greater power, and it was abundantly clear which way the wind was blowing. Several had even voiced their support for his decision behind closed doors. A knock on the cabin window startled Elias out of his thoughts. Sir Dennis looked out of the carriage before pulling the latch. "My lord," the knight outside said, "Our guest wishes to speak with you." Elias nodded, and then he frowned as Liam seemed to materialize behind the knight. He hadn't noticed that he was standing there. His escorts joined him in his frown as the boy entered the cabin. "Do these streets flood in the winter?" the assassin asked. "The lower parts of the city usually experience a bit of flooding," Elias said. "It can't be helped with this landscape." Ravel sat below the confluence of 3 rivers, which made it convenient as a center of trade but prone to flooding. Flood management efforts were made, of course, but water always seemed to find a way to creep into the city's lower districts. The city's administration blamed lazy workers while the workers blamed incompetent management. Attempts to straighten things out only sucked any would-be problem solvers into the mess. His frustrations over the issue often led him to nearly sack everyone involved, but then he would realize that half the city would end up underwater as there was no one to replace them. "I need to go to the harbor district next," Liam said. Elias nodded and Sir Dennis rose to order the driver to take them to the waterfront. Along their way there, he could have sworn the road was bumpier than it should have been. The assassin didn't say anything about it, however, he simply stared out of his window at the passing streetscape. "It's not a secret, you know," he said. "I beg your pardon?" The assassin held out his clipboard. "You don't have to keep trying to sneak glances," he said. "You'll be receiving a copy of the survey along with recommendations from my superiors." Sir Dennis reached out to take a look at the clipboard, but Elias snatched it away before he could. Location, Common District. Street type, Major. Width, 6 meters. Material, cobblestone, large. Condition, poor. Drainage, poor. Grade, poor. Sidewalk, no. Sidewalk width, not applicable. Traffic control, none. Cargo allowed, yes. Loading allowed, yes. Maximum load, 2-axle wagon, 1 ton. Location, Common District. Street type, minor. Width, 4 meters. Material, large cobblestone, clay, variable. Condition, poor. Drainage, poor. Grade, poor. Sidewalk, no. Sidewalk width, not applicable. Traffic control, none. Cargo allowed, yes. Loading allowed, yes. Maximum freight, 2-axle wagon, 1 ton. Location, Common District. Street type, alley. Width, 2 meters. Material, clay. Condition, poor. Drainage, poor. Grade, poor. Sidewalk, no. Sidewalk width, not applicable. Traffic control, none. Cargo allowed, yes. Loading allowed, yes. Maximum freight, pack animals, weak golems. The corner of Elias' right eye twitched involuntarily as the assassin stabbed him repeatedly with his bureaucratic daggers. His anxiety rose as he continued scanning through the information. There was no doubt that a report like this would be poorly received by the Sorceress Kingdom's leadership. "No, Maybe that won't be the case. It was a pit of inhuman monsters, after all. The frog-like devil called Demiurge saw humans as little more than experimental subjects, while the demon posing as the Prime Minister thought even less of them. Perhaps wallowing in the mud like mindless livestock was exactly what she thought humans were meant to do. I can't help but think that this assessment is overly critical, Elias said. How so? Liam asked. To begin with, Elias answered, you are comparing us to the undisputed masters of stonework in the region. By your own account of demand for infrastructure in the Empire, it's unreasonable to use their craftsmanship as the regional standard. I don't think I ever said that dwarven infrastructure was being used as the standard, Liam replied. I just mentioned them to your vassals because the quality of dwarven craftsmanship is common knowledge. In that case, Elias said, what is the standard? The same standard that the nobles in the Empire are switching to. They're anticipating a much heavier load on their transportation network, and the roads that they have right now won't last long when that happens. Surely the quality of this new infrastructure will be reflected in its cost, Elias said. How can they afford it? Barring seasonal fortunes, the Empire's economic output is comparable to Reistice's. The Empire is just more efficient with its resources because it enjoys a higher degree of centralization. That's far from sufficient to rebuild the entire country's infrastructure. I don't know about any of that, the assassin replied. They are doing their main roads first, so maybe you're right. The tepid response only left him with more questions. He probably shouldn't have expected much in the way of an answer from a minion in the first place. Elias wrinkled his nose as the stench of the city's streets mingled with the stench of the city's wharves. The riverfront wasn't a place where any well-to-do individual wanted to find himself, and the malodorous atmosphere was only one of the many reasons. Countless gazes followed his carriage's progress, and hardly any of them expressed a sense of respect or admiration. Sir Dennis rested a hand on the pommel of his sword, looking out of the windows as Elias' escort secured the area. Can I go ahead? The assassin asked. What do you intend to inspect here? Everything. The armsman outside started as the assassin suddenly opened the carriage door and hopped out. By the time the escort declared the area secure and Elias stepped out onto the sun-baked waterfront, Liam was nowhere to be seen. Where did he go? We lost track of him in that group of warehouses, my lord. One of his knights pointed at the wooden buildings lining the wharf several dozen meters away. Shall we dispatch some thief-takers to find him? What was he doing before that? Elias asked. The same thing as when we were in the upper city, the knight answered. Poking around the streets and alleys. Looking at the wagons and workshop entrances. If we hadn't been accompanying him in the first place, I'd have apprehended him as a saboteur. Please don't add to my worries. The Sorceress Kingdom was already making blatant threats against his family. The chaos caused by acts of sabotage against critical infrastructure would surely cause him to go bald. See if they can't find him, Elias said, but don't get in his way. The sooner we get this over with, the better. I can already hear my wife and daughter complaining about the stink on my boots, the knight smiled wryly. I'll let the men know, my lord. Elias held a handkerchief over his nose as he cooked on the wharf alongside several piles of refuse. The warm and dry conditions were good for the autumn harvest, but he couldn't find it in him to appreciate the fortuitous weather. Already, his court was receiving reports about crop failures occurring throughout Reistice, which raised concerns over vagrants, bandits, and worse. With the loss of so many professional armsmen at the Battle of Katsa Plains, much of the kingdom already found itself trapped in a downward spiral of economic decay and lawlessness. To prepare for the worst-case scenario, Elias had withdrawn to his territories and enacted dozens of new policies. Not only were he and his vassals rushing to replenish their territorial security forces, but food and fuel exports had been banned. He'd have imported as much food as he could afford, as well, but contracts on the open market had all but vanished. One might have pointed out how his actions would make the situation worse downriver, but his decisions were ultimately correct. As a noble, the needs of his territory took priority over everything else. Hey! Where do you think you're going, kid? Elias rushed toward the sound of the irate shout. He arrived at a nearby pier to find Liam facing off against a sweaty merchant guard whose patience appeared to have evaporated under the heat of the midday sun. "I just wanted to go to the end of the pier," the assassin said. "Not this pier, you ain't." The guard rose to his full height. "Get the fuck out of my sight." Every hair on Elias' body rose on end as the ill-tempered guard swung a meaty fist at the Sorcerer's Kingdom's agent. The assassin took a step back, effortlessly evading the man's attack. Fortunately, Liam seemed content to allow the nearby armsman to step forward and defuse the situation. "That's enough." "Who the what the hell, a knight?" "That's a knight to you. I understand you're guarding your company's ship, but that doesn't give you any right to assault the citizenry." The merchant guard's expression of anger was replaced by sheer confusion. It was hardly surprising. In no normal situation would a member of the town militia, never mind a knight, intercede on behalf of a common youth. The authorities had neither the time nor the resources to police the city to that degree. That the merchants of the city had to post private security at their cargo berths was evidence enough of this. With the commotion quelled, Elias searched for Liam, but he had disappeared again. He didn't catch sight of him until he appeared at his side several minutes later. Too late, his escort moved in reaction to the assassin's appearance. "I'm done here," he said. Elias did his best not to jump at the sound of his voice. "What is our next destination?" he asked. "I've seen everything I need to see," Liam replied. "Thanks for showing me around."